I got to hear some new preliminary research that I think has the potential to possibly shift the narrative on Joseph Smith's Nauvoo polygamy. Historian Don Bradley has discovered that we may have gotten the date wrong for Joseph Smith's first plural marriage in Nauvoo to Louisa Beaman. And while this does seem like a minor detail, it actually shifts the order of his plural marriages in Nauvoo, and a pretty striking pattern emerges about maybe his motives for practicing polygamy. But you're going to kind of have to stick with me on this to follow the argument. Okay, so originally we thought that Joseph Smith married single 26-year-old Louisa Beaman in April of 1841, but this was based on now what seems to be unreliable information from Joseph Bates Noble. The sealing to Joseph took place in Joseph Bates Noble's house, but his house wasn't even constructed until later that year in the fall of 1841, so now it seems more likely that Joseph Smith was actually sealed to Louisa a year later, maybe in the April of 1842.
Okay, wait. Your entire argument is that Joseph and Louisa were married in Joseph Bates Noble's house, but that because his house wasn't completed until the fall of 1841, that would place the date of the marriage in April of 1842. So according to Joseph Bates Noble, the two were married on April 5th of 1841. He performed the ceremony. But here's the thing. Joseph and Louisa were actually married on the banks of the Mississippi River. This story is also told by First Presidency member William Law in the Nauvoo Expositor. And Louisa's brother-in-law Erastus Snow said they were married in a grove near Main Street. You'll see that some of Main Street, particularly those closest to Joseph Smith's home, are right on the banks of the Mississippi. And it's full of groves. Even Annalisa Webb Young, a later wife of Brigham Young, said in her book that Joseph and Louisa repaired one night to the banks of the Mississippi River where this ceremony was performed. It was also said that Louisa had to be dressed as a man so as not to be recognized. If they were married in Noble's home, there would be no need for a disguise. The part where Noble's home comes into play is when Noble is testifying under oath concerning the relationship between Joseph and Louisa. Question: where did they, Joseph and Louisa, sleep together? Answer: right straight across the river at my house they slept together. But let's listen to the rest of her argument.
Again, this shifts the order of the marriages. So now the first plural marriage in Nauvoo wasn't actually to Louisa Beaman, but rather to Zina Huntington. This changes things because now all of a sudden Joseph Smith's first wives aren't young, single, eligible women. They are married, pregnant women. Zina Huntington, 7 months pregnant at the time she was sealed to Joseph. Presentia Huntington, not entirely certain, but it is likely that she was pregnant at the time she was sealed to Joseph. Agnes Coolbrith, not pregnant, but recently widowed by Joseph's own brother, Don Carlos, and he likely felt some responsibility to care for her, kind of like a biblical levirate marriage. Mary Elizabeth Rollins, not just pregnant, but like almost full term when she was sealed to Joseph. Now, if you didn't know, in the 19th century, you did not do the deed with pregnant women. Not only was it socially taboo, but it was considered medically dangerous for the mother and unborn child at this point in history.
Okay, first of all, I'd love to see your sources on men not having sex with their pregnant wives. I was Googling all last night and looking through old medical textbooks and I couldn't find anything. But I'm open to that being a possibility provided you have a source. But even if it were in a medical textbook, or something of that nature, that doesn't mean that Joseph Smith held himself to those standards.
So he wouldn't start marrying single women until the April of 1842 when he would marry Louisa, who was recently orphaned, and Eliza R. Snow, who may have been a victim of violence by Missouri mobs, so both possibly needing welfare care.
Orphan? Okay, so Louisa's parents did die, but in their 60s. I'd say that's pretty good for a frontier American. Okay, so you seem to be implying that Louisa being an orphan makes it okay if Joseph Smith marries her because he can take care of her financially? But Louisa was living with Joseph Bates Noble at the time. She wasn't in need of Joseph Smith. Also, Joseph being a secret, already married polyandrous husband doesn't mean that he's well equipped to taking care of any orphan. Also, it is possible to take care of someone financially without having to marry them first.
While discerning motive historically is obviously difficult by nature, if Joseph introduced plural marriage just so we could get some quick and easy, in the words of Don Bradley, maybe he should take some lessons because Joseph's doing it wrong. There is no evidence for intimacy in these early polyandrous sealings in Nauvoo, which were for eternity only.
That's a bold statement to make. There is actually evidence that Joseph Smith had sex with his polyandrous wives. Let's take Sylvia Sessions, for example. Sylvia told her daughter Josephine before she died that she was actually the daughter of Joseph Smith. But according to the church, Josephine was actually Windsor Lyon's daughter and not Joseph's. Sylvia's confession only makes sense if she were having sex with both Joseph and Windsor at the same time. Well, you know what I mean. Also, why are we not counting the Kirtland wives? Joseph was married to single teenager Fanny Alger in 1833, and then to Lucinda Pendleton, married, in 1838. Oliver Cowdery testified that Joseph and Fanny were having sexual relations, along with William McClellan and Wilhelm Will.
Instead, perhaps a more reasonable scenario is that God actually commanded this. Joseph was understandably reluctant, and so he first introduced plural marriage in Nauvoo with married and pregnant women because he felt he could fulfill God's really difficult commandment and raise up seed, bear children, because that was one of the reasons given for plural marriage, without actually having to do the deed.
Okay, I'm going to play that again, in case you missed it.
And so he first introduced plural marriage in Nauvoo with married and pregnant women because he felt he could fulfill God's really difficult commandment and raise up seed, bear children, because that was one of the reasons given for plural marriage, without actually having to do the deed.
So not only is he stealing other men's wives, he's also stealing other men's children? Of the 11 women he married that were already married, only one of the husbands had become disaffected from the church at the time of the polyamorous union, and 3 of the husbands were not members of the church. So, for 7 of these women, Joseph is essentially stealing these men's wives in the eternities. It doesn't matter if they have sex or not. Joseph is taking these women for himself. And as you're strangely pointing out, he's also taking their children.
It's not until later, upon God's insistence, that Joseph moves forward with sealing single women for time and eternity to live plural marriage in a fuller sense. This is, again, just preliminary research that was presented at the Fair Conference this year, but I think it's a fascinating perspective on a really difficult issue.
I feel like the whole point of your argument is to show that Joseph Smith wasn't interested in polygamy, at first to get some quick and easy. However, according to the Book of Mormon, and later to the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, the purpose of polygamy was to raise up seed unto the Lord. Joseph should not be marrying already married women. Period. Henry Jacobs, Windsor Lyon, Orson Hyde, and Jabez Durfee, they were already raising their seed up unto the Lord. And in the cases of Norman Buell, Adam Leitner, and John Cleveland, those who are disaffected or not even members of the church, Joseph did not raise their seed unto the Lord. There is no way to make polyamory okay based on the scriptures. What Joseph Smith did was against church doctrine.